It's good to be with you again. My name is Reverend Forrest Gilmore, and I'm the community minister in our church in Bloomington. And I also serve as the executive director of the Shalom Center, which is a homeless resource center and housing provider down in Bloomington as well. And before entering into the nonprofit world, I served as a parish minister for about a decade, and now I've been in nonprofit work for about a decade too. So it's good to be with you today and to join you today. So today we start with opening words from Mark Twain in his writing, The Chronicle of Young Satan in Mysterious Stranger Transcripts. And this is Satan actually speaking. And he says, humanity has one unquestionably really effective weapon: laughter. Power, money, persuasion, supplication, persecution, these can lift at a colossal humbug, push it a little, crowd it a little, weaken it a little, century by century. But only laughter can blow it to rags and atoms at a blast. Against the assault of laughter, nothing can stand. In 2007, in Knoxville, Tennessee, a neo-Nazi rally prepared to march. A counter-protest was organized, but instead of anger and rage, these neo-Nazis were met with something different: a large troop of clowns. As the neo-Nazis shouted white power, these clowns pretended not to understand and shouted back, "White flour?" throwing fistfuls of flour into the air. The Nazis shouting white power again, the clowns responded, "Tight shower?" And they held up a shower head and crowded ridiculously close together. Again and again, they mocked the calls to white power with misunderstanding. Wife power? And they raised letters up high, spelling out the words, putting on wedding dresses, and the female clowns lifted the male clowns into the air, carrying them around. White flowers? And they handed white flowers out to everyone, including some of the neo-Nazis. The clowns, calling themselves the Ku Klux Klowns, I have to be really careful pronouncing that, stole the show as the police walked cheerfully alongside them, and the neo-Nazis canceled their rally hours early. The German town of Wunsiedel struggled to deal with an annual neo-Nazi march through their community. Ordinary counter-protests failed, so they tried a different tack. They knew where the walk consistently happened, because it happened every year. They knew where the start and the finish was, so they painted on the streets start and finish lines. And they hung funny signs along the route, and they threw confetti at the end. The town sponsored 10 euros for every meter the neo-Nazis walked, and donated the equivalent of $12,000 to an organization that helped people leave hate groups. Yeah. In Columbia, South Carolina, a tuba player, actually a sousaphone player, some of you may have seen this, followed along a rally to honor the Confederate flag by playing silly songs and Ride of the Valkyries, the famous piece from the notoriously anti-Semitic Richard Wagner. In Portland, Oregon, during a recent Proud Boys march, a marching band dressed up as bananas, calling themselves the Banana Block, dressed up as bananas and called themselves the Banana Block, and also a video made the rounds from that very same protest of two people in giant inflatable unicorn costumes with rainbow manes engaging with right-wingers. You know, white supremacy and right-wing extremism is terrifyingly on the rise. I think many of us are aware of this. This is horrible. In 2018, every single act of extremist violence in the United States was linked to right-wing extremism. And over the last decade, nearly 75% of extremist-related killings have been linked to domestic right-wing extremism. Violent hate crimes are on the rise, hitting their highest number ever in 2018. We're also seeing public expressions of right-wing extremism growing with the manifestation of the alt-right, the extremist infiltration of the college lecture circuit, the Proud Boys rallies in the Pacific Northwest, and the pro-Confederate rallies often in the South. To understand all of what's going on, and even more importantly, how to combat it, we have to get into the psychology a bit of white supremacists and the reasons behind right-wing violence. And it starts with an experience of threat. The El Paso attacker, in a manifesto he left behind, described the growing number of Latinos in Texas as an invasion that threatened the power of white Americans. Other recent extremist attackers have expressed similar fears of being under attack from immigrants, people of color, Muslims, Jewish people, and other minority groups. For those of us who are not immersed, obviously, in right-wing extremism, this sense of threat that right-wing extremists can feel foreign or strange to us because we often think of right-wing extremists as the threat. But the motivation, it's important to remember that their motivation starts with themselves perceiving themselves as being threatened. Commonly espoused in white supremacist circles, the great replacement theory posits a plot masterminded by Jewish people to replace whites with other races. This was narratively so well represented and horrifyingly represented by the torch-bearing marchers of Charlottesville as they shouted, "You will not replace us," occasionally transforming their chants into, "Jews will not replace us." Kathleen Blee, professor of sociology and dean at the University of Pittsburgh, said, "What propels white supremacy historically is threat, the idea that the white race is imperiled. And this sense of threat then justifies their acts of violence." Peter Simi, associate professor of sociology at Chapman University, said, "For the far-right groups, violence is central to their way of looking at the world. The idea of having violent confrontation and conflicts fuels and energizes them. They feed off of it." So in dealing with white supremacists in a public setting like a march or a parade or a protest, we have to keep that at the center of our attention. They thrive on threat and violence and take advantage of it to harden their beliefs, to fundraise, and to recruit. Tina Rosenberg, in an opinion piece for the New York Times, wrote, "Here's what white supremacists want to do when they stage a rally. They want to legitimize their views. They want to strengthen their self-image as part of the downtrodden. They want to unite their squabbling factions. They want to attract new people to the movement. They want to control media coverage. And they want to feel powerful and heroic." She continues, "They can accomplish all of those goals when the Antifa or anti-fascists respond to violence by throwing fists or rocks." She says, "If you want to resist those who would stir up violence, using humor is more effective than staying home when they march, and far better than rewarding their provocations with a melee in the streets. Cass Mudd, associate professor at the University of Georgia, says, ridicule makes the far right look less attractive to the type of people they want to attract. There's a sizable portion who are there for the thrill. Doesn't mean they don't believe in the broader ideology, but they really enjoy the potential violence. They want to feel dangerous and important. They don't want to feel like part of a sketch. Tina Rosenberg continues, after all, which plan is more attractive to young macho men? We'll face a small group of masked tough guys, or we'll face a large number of men, women, and children wearing silly hats and big red noses. And that brings us to Bloomington. Since June of this past year, it has become widely known that one of the vendors at our local farmers market, the owners of Schooner Creek Farm, belong to and recruit for a white nationalist hate group known as the American Identity Movement. American Identity Movement recently changed its name from Identity Europa, and they were major organizers of the Charlottesville Unite the Right rallies. And they changed their name and reorganized because of the massive negative feedback and pushback following those rallies, and also that both their founder and their past director are currently being sued for instigating violence there. In 2017, Eli Mosley, the past head of Identity Europa, said some of the most horrifying words I've ever heard. And I'm going to share these words with you, but I just want to warn you that these words are filled with racist and anti-Semitic epithets, which I'll edit out, and racial and religious violence. There are two epithets in there that I'm going to shorten, one to the S word, and that is a racist name commonly used for people who are Hispanic. And then there's a K word, which is an anti-Semitic word for Jewish people. He also uses the N word, which I think many of you will know what that is. He said, I work in HR, I work in human resources, firing N words and S words all day. Before that, I was in the Army, and I got to kill Muslims for fun. I'm not sure which one was better, watching N words and S words cry because they can't feed their little mud children, or watching Muslims' brains spray on the wall. It's horrifying. Honestly, both probably suck compared to listening to a K-words scream while in the oven. So anyone who is both a member of such a group and recruits for this group is of serious concern. When awareness grew of this issue, the privately owned market in nearby Nashville, Indiana, banned Schooner Creek Farm almost immediately. But because the Bloomington market is run by the city, protections of speech and assembly kicked in. Without direct and significant evidence of discrimination in the market, the city did not believe it could legally cancel their contract. Since then, many in our community have been trying an alternative approach. We've been protesting, we've been encouraging a boycott, and advocating for policy change to support the safety and dignity of people of color, religious minorities, and other marginalized groups in our community and in the market. And it's been a bit of a mess, truthfully. The protests started with online advocacy and flyering on the edge of the market to inform people, but threats from white supremacists began fairly quickly. A local Antifa group walked into the market dressed in what's called black bloc, covered in black from head to toe with masks, and in response to these threats, and stood in front of the stand in an attempt to scare white supremacists from coming to the market, these who are making threats online. And unfortunately, that backfired, and a local right-wing militia showed up armed the next week to protect the white supremacist farmers. Online activity skyrocketed, with many viable threats coming in from white supremacists, with both locally and throughout the country and the world. The mass shootings at the Gilroy Garlic Festival and in El Paso and Dayton had all just happened. To prevent further harm, the mayor closed the market for 2 weeks and then reopened with increased police presence and active suppression of public protest. The market prohibited flyering and carrying signs in the market, and protesters were actively policed and pressured out of the market. And any and all protesting was greatly discouraged by the allies of the mayor's office. So some of us got together to figure out how to creatively protest without getting arrested. We created T-shirts that featured a Cornell West quote on the front, "Justice is what love looks like in public," and it read, "Boycott Schooner Creek, defund white supremacy," on the back. And we chose purple as the color for those T-shirts because we love the color, and it was about the least threatening color imaginable. I'll show you. Here's the shirts that we put together. So these weren't a sign, these weren't a flyer. These were something we wore on our body, and so that allowed us to continue to kind of protest and advocate in the community, and at least be a public presence in the market to express our deep concern about the presence of white supremacists in the market. We also signed a covenant of nonviolence that restricted us from engaging Schooner Creek Farm, from their customers, or anyone else trying to start a fight. And we walked in the market, including in front of the stand, to express our opinion. Now, it stirred a lot of unrest both for the farm stand and for the market staff. They tried hard to get us to leave, and they threatened to call the police. But we left peacefully as planned at noon that Saturday. Schooner Creek Farm, trying to mock us and stir up a sense of martyrdom, labeled us the Purple Shirt Brigade. And we claimed the name proudly, so that's what we became, the Purple Shirt Brigade. We also found a theme song, "Start Wearing Purple" by Gogol Bordello. And we used social media to encourage the community to wear purple to the market as an act of protest and defiance. And I know I see some of you wearing purple today, which may be a coincidence or may not, but thank you for bringing that voice out with your clothing today. The next week we pushed the envelope. We walked into the market with our T-shirts. Well, we also had tiny little purple signs with nothing written on them. These were our signs. So when the market staff demanded we remove the signs, we started fanning ourselves and claiming they were not signs at all. This was fun. Mostly. Over the next few weeks, things slowed because Schooner Creek unexpectedly didn't show up a few times, and we also had some awful weather a few times as well. But we did have a great protest in the rain one Saturday when we wore clear ponchos over our T-shirts and carried purple umbrellas. We also played "Start Wearing Purple" on a speaker, and we danced in the rain. On the first Saturday in November, just after Halloween, we actually had hoped to do this protest the week just prior to Halloween, but we got rained out. But on the first Saturday, we walked, like I said, with the umbrellas because we were there every Saturday, regardless of what the weather was, but we changed our tactics depending on the weather. So on the first Saturday in November, just after Halloween, we upped our game again, and we wore costumes and brought in some guitarists. We played a personalized rewrite of Start Wearing Purple and protested as purple unicorns, a purple octopus, a purple Wonder Woman, a purple wizard, and all other kinds of wild, unidentifiable purple galore. Following the market that day, Schooner Creek Farm posted the photos, and their supporters began calling us all kinds of names like degenerate furies and lunatics out for an airing. And that, excuse the term, sissy unicorn, and weird nuts and more. But you know what didn't happen? We'd already been in the market for at least 6 weeks at that point, a little bit more. There were no counter rallies in the market. None. No militias, no white supremacists, no right-wing escalation of any kind. And the boycott was working with a significant sales drop for the farm. The next week, we pushed it again. We came into the market wearing costumes and singing songs, but this time we intentionally chose to hold signs, and these were signs with the names that the supporters of Schooner Creek Farm had given us. All we had were the signs, we had the names that they had given us as our signs. And so you can kind of see this is kind of the activity that was going on that day. And you can't really see, I'm the unicorn, by the way. You can't really see my sign, but what it says is degenerate. It says degenerate furries against white supremacy. And that's when we were arrested, 5 of us. 5 of us were arrested for singing and for carrying a sign in America. This is the 5 of us that I mentioned that showed before. These were the 5 of us who were arrested and were standing. We were arrested and then cited and released, and so each of us is holding up our citations there. You know, a unicorn, I'm just going to show you some pictures. So this is one of the things they said about us, that we're giving the unicorn a bad name. So this was another unicorn. This was our initial encounter with the police. Yeah, it's kind of amazing. These are the images we were kind of hoping for. So there's post-arrest. So, and a unicorn, 5 of us were arrested, a unicorn, an octopus, a Viking, Minnesota Viking, purple, get it, a wizard, and Wonder Woman herself, who was in a wheelchair, by the way, were scooped up by the law. Now, the charges we were arrested on were trespassing and disorderly conduct, although technically we have yet to be charged by the prosecutor. It's a month since, and we have yet to be charged, and we're hoping that we don't get charged. But the arrest went viral online, as you can guess why. And they made national news, and they were featured in the Daily Beast and Newsweek and the UU World. Just the very recent article just a few days ago came out in the UU World, which actually I think was probably the best written article of the bunch. The market is now closed for the season, and much remains up in the air. Perhaps most promising, we were told that Schooner Creek Farm had between a 60% and 80% drop in their sales. Initially, they also seemed to make quite a bit of money online from white supremacist supporters, kind of taking that sense of threat and driving it financially for themselves. But we believe that has dropped off significantly since then, because a lot of white supremacists have been, if you will, deplatformed from things like PayPal and Venmo and things like that. And so they have to do things through like Bitcoin. and Bitcoin is all public, so you can see when money comes in. And so we think that their support has dropped off significantly, although it really is interesting because you see certain donations come in. It's a little bit of a side, but you see certain donations come in dollar figures like $14.88. And some of you who know white nationalist supremacy kind of symbology, that's the 14 is the 14 letters in a phrase that I'm not going to say, but it's a common white supremacist motto. And the 88 is HH, Heil Hitler, the eighth letter of the alphabet for H. And so just the donations it's just so blatant and so obvious, despite the fact that the Schooner Creek farm tries to pretend innocence. Now, it has been hard to continue on with this work. For many of the activists, we've given up almost every Saturday morning since this went wide, since we became aware of this. There have been some in our community who have known about this for quite some time, but it went wide in June. And plus, there's lots of planning during the week and arrests for some of us, of course. And maybe the hardest part of sustained activism is navigating the human relationships, both from fellow activists, but also from those who label themselves allies, but criticize from the sidelines. Angela Davis reminds us, in a racist society, it's not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. People of color, I think, know this all too well, that when things get tough in anti-racist work, many white people head for the door and abandon them. So it is really important to me as a Unitarian Universalist, as a minister, and as a human being, despite the difficulty and awfulness at times, to stick this out and to find those moments when we can have a sense of humor to add to it. So we will continue on regardless of what happens this winter. We will continue on to prevent the normalization of white supremacy in our community, and in the hopes we can create a farmers market that is both safer for and more supportive of the dignity of people of color and religious minorities and LGBTQ folks and other marginalized groups. We do take some consolation from the words of Tina Rosenberg in her New York Times piece. It seems too basic to even say, but the rule is violated again and again. Successful political activists are strategic. They ask, what will reach and motivate or convince the people we need? Very often, the answer is make them laugh. Shalom, amen, and blessed be.